I've always been skeptical about the paranormal. You know, the kind of person who rolls their eyes at ghost stories and thinks there's always a logical explanation for everything. But what I experienced at my uncle's funeral has left me with more questions than answers. My uncle passed away suddenly, a massive heart attack in the middle of the night. It shocked the whole family. He wasn't young, but he wasn't sick either, so his death came as a surprise to everyone. He was a well-loved figure, always the life of family gatherings, and his funeral was packed with friends, family, and neighbors. The funeral was held in an old church just outside of town, the kind with creaky wooden pews and stained glass windows that cast eerie shadows when the sun hits them just right. We all gathered inside, with a large picture of my uncle at the front, surrounded by flowers. As the ceremony started, the room was heavy with grief. We all gathered inside, with the lock flying open, as the first frame solidified into the side. With the lock flying open, the first frame was before 7 minutes after the clock struck 12. I was sitting towards the back, near the aisle, so I had a good view of everything. The priest was just getting into the first prayer when I noticed a cold breeze wash over me. It struck me as odd because the church was old and stuffy, not exactly a place where you'd expect a random gust of wind. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe someone opened a door somewhere. But when I looked around, I realized all the doors were shut tight. The chill lingered, sending a shiver down my spine. That's when I saw it. There was a faint, almost imperceptible movement near the casket at the front. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection off the stained glass maybe. But the air in the room seemed to change. I squinted to get a better look, and I swear I saw a shadow, a figure, standing just a few feet from the casket. It wasn't clear. It was like a translucent silhouette, barely visible, but definitely there. It was just standing. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked, and it was gone. I felt a wave of panic, thinking I had imagined the whole thing, but as I looked around, I noticed something even stranger. My cousin, who was sitting a few rows in front of me, had gone pale. He was staring at the exact spot I had seen the figure, his face white as a sheet. He looked back at me with wide eyes, and I knew instantly that I wasn't the only one who saw it. The rest of the funeral went on without a hitch, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After the ceremony, I pulled my cousin aside, and he immediately asked, "And did you see it too?" We exchanged nervous glances, both of us unsure if we wanted to talk about what had just happened. He described the exact same thing, a shadowy figure standing near the casket, almost like it was watching over us. We didn't say much more, not wanting to upset anyone else in the family, but that wasn't the end of it. The real shock came when we went to the graveyard for the burial. It was a gray, overcast day with a light drizzle, making the atmosphere even more somber. As we gathered around the grave, the priest began the final prayers, and everyone was lost in their own thoughts of grief. My mind kept drifting back to that shadow in the church. One of my uncle's closest friends, a man who had known him since childhood, suddenly gasped and clutched his chest. We all thought he was having a heart attack, and a few of us rushed to help him, but he was fine, just stunned. He claimed he had felt someone tap him on the shoulder, but when he turned around, there was nobody there. That night, after everything had calmed down and the family had gathered back at my aunt's house, my cousin and I decided to bring it up. We told the family what we had seen in the church and about the cold breeze at the cemetery. Most of them shrugged it off as grief messing with our minds, but my aunt listened intently, her face growing more serious. She told us something I'll never forget. Apparently, my uncle had always joked that if there was an afterlife, he'd find a way to show up at his own funeral. He had a wicked sense of humor, the kind that made everyone laugh, and he was notorious for pranks and surprises at family gatherings. My aunt thought it was his way of saying goodbye, one last playful trick to let us know he was still around. I want to believe it was just my imagination. I've tried to rationalize it 100 different ways, but every time I replay that day in my mind, the chill creeps back over me. I can still see that shadowy figure in the church standing quietly by my uncle's casket. I don't know what I witnessed that day, and I don't think I ever will, but I do know this: it changed the way I see things. I can't say I'm a true believer in the paranormal now, but I'm definitely not as skeptical as I used to be. Sometimes I think the unexplained doesn't need an explanation. It just is. To this day, I've never brought it up again with my cousin or the rest of my family. It's like an unspoken secret we both carry, a memory of something unexplainable that happened on one of the saddest days of our lives. Maybe it was grief playing tricks on our minds. Maybe it was a strange coincidence. Or maybe, just maybe, it was my uncle finding a way to keep his promise.